Hi Bobcats, this is Miss Lee, and this video lesson is on operations with rational numbers. So this year in 6th grade, we've learned how to multiply and divide with decimals and with fractions. We've also learned how to add, subtract, and multiply integers, negative numbers. Well, now we're going to throw everything together along with what you learned in elementary about adding and subtracting fractions and decimals, and we're going to group it all together. So we may be adding decimals, but there's positive and negatives, or maybe we're subtracting positive and negative fractions. Okay, we're just throwing it all together. So you do need your notes. Fill out your notes as we go through. If I go too fast, just pause the video. We're going to start with combining rational numbers. Let's talk about the signs. This is something new that we've learned this year. We know that if the signs are the same, we're going to add them up and keep the sign. Remember the song, if the signs are the same, add them up, or find the sum. Some people sing find the sum. So you're going to add them up and keep the sign. If they're both negative, or if they're all negative, your answer is negative. If they're all positive, your answer is positive. But if the signs are different, then you subtract. You find the difference. And remember, once you subtract, then you have to go back and you have to see which number had more signs. Were there more positive signs, or were there more negative signs? And which one had the most, that's the answer, or that's the sign of your answer. So if you have more negatives, your answer is negative. If there were more positives, your answer is positive. Okay, so now that we've got the signs, we have to think about how to combine, add and subtract fractions, how to add and subtract decimals. This is what we did in elementary school. So as a reminder, when you're adding or subtracting fractions, they must have the same denominator. You have to have a common denominator. They have to be the same size. When it comes to mixed numbers, especially with subtraction, sometimes it might be easier to change the mixed number to an improper fraction first. Okay, that's especially true for when you're subtracting mixed numbers. A lot of people forget that when they forget how to borrow from the whole number and change the fraction and then find a common denominator, it gets a little too complicated, so this might be a good hint to do. Then decimals. Whenever you're adding or subtracting decimal numbers, the most important thing to remember is to line up the decimal points. You have to combine numbers that are in the same place value. You cannot combine a number that is a whole number in the ones place with a digit that is in the tenths place or the hundreds place. Okay? You can only combine ones places with ones places, tenths with tenths, etc. So let's do some examples. So our first one, we have decimals. We're adding these decimals. So I'm going to go ahead, because we're dealing with positive and negatives, and I'm going to circle each number and their sign. And I see that the signs are different. If the signs are different, then subtract, right? Okay, so let's forget about the sign for right now, and let's look at the numbers. This is a regular subtraction. Yes, the 7.92 has more digits, but the 8.3 is a larger number. So the regular subtraction, you have to put the larger number on top. And because we're dealing with decimals, you have to line up the decimal points. So it's going to be 7.92. This means that we have a hole up here next to the 3, and that's okay because we know we can put a 0 there. And then you subtract like normal. We're going to have to borrow from the 3. Okay, so 10 minus 2 is 8. We're going to have to borrow from the 8 to make a 12, so 12 minus 9 is 3. Up, decimal point, bring it straight down, nice and big, and subtract 7 minus 7 is 0. So your answer is 38 hundredths. Now go back. Are there more negatives or are there more positives? Well, there's negative 8 and positive 7. There's more negatives. So the answer is negative 38 hundredths. If you come down to D, let's work the decimals together. You can see that you have a positive 25 hundredths, and look at here. What do you see? A double negative. A double negative turns into a big old positive. So both my decimal numbers are positive. If they're the same signs, if the signs are the same, add them up. So let's add them up. Line them up, 1 and 35 hundredths, line up those decimal points. You put a 0 here, add them up, there's 10, carry a 1, 5, that would be 6, bring down the decimal point, and 1. So the answer is 1 60/100 or 1 6/10 if you want to drop that last 0. Again, they were the same side. They were both positive, so our answer is positive. Now what about fractions? Okay, I think decimals are pretty easy. The fractions are going to be a little bit more difficult, a little bit more to remember. So we have 1/2 plus a -3/4. Again, you need to circle each rational number and their sign. And you can see that the signs are different. So we have to subtract. Okay, so we're going to do 3/4 minus 1/2. So 3/4 minus 1/2. Now I always write mine vertically. Some people write theirs horizontally, that's fine. But you have to have the same denominator. They're not the same denominator. So you look for the common denominator. And this is a 4. And I know that 4 is a multiple of 2, so I can change this 2 into fourths as well. I use the scale factor of multiplying by 2. 1 times 2 is 2, so I get 2/4. This one is going to stay at 3/4. And now I'm going to subtract. I subtract, even though this is addition, I'm subtracting because the signs are different. So subtract the numerators. 3 times 2 is 1, and the denominator stays the same. So it's going to be 1/4. Now you have to figure out the sign. Are there more negatives or are there more positives? Well, 3/4 is a larger fraction, so there's more negatives. Therefore, our answer is negative. Negative 1/4. So here we have 1/2 minus 2 1/4. So again, we need to circle each rational number and their signs. The signs are different, so you have to subtract. Okay, this is where I was talking about that, especially for subtracting with the mixed numbers, that it's going to be easier to change them to improper fractions. And I'll show you why. Just because you don't have to worry about borrowing. So this becomes 3/2 minus 9/4. This one's 9/4. The 9/4, of course, is larger, so 9/4 minus 3/2. All you have to worry about once you've done this is finding a common denominator, which is going to be the 4. So the 9/4 is going to stay a 9/4. We're going to change the halves into fourths by multiplying by a scale factor of 2. Do the same to the numerator, and we get 6/4. And now you just subtract the numerators. 9 minus 6 is 3, and the denominator stays the same. So we have 3/4. Go back up here. Are there more positives or more negatives? You can see that there are more negatives, so the answer is negative 3/4. Let's talk about multiplying rational numbers. When we're multiplying rational numbers, if the signs are the same, you have a positive answer. A negative times a negative is a positive. A positive times a positive is a positive. If the signs are different, your answer is negative. A negative times a positive or divided, well, this is multiplication, so negative times a negative is negative times a positive is a negative. A positive times a negative is a negative. This is where your tricks come into play. So use one of your tricks. Use your triangle trick, use the tic-tac-toe trick, you can use the faces trick, okay? Then if they're fractions, how do you multiply with fractions? We've just learned this. To multiply with fractions, first, simplify before you multiply, if you can. Then you multiply the numerators together, then you multiply the denominators together, and then if you need to simplify again, then you do so. If you're multiplying decimals, we've just learned this as well. You multiply as if they were whole numbers. Take away the decimal points. Multiply as if they're whole numbers. Then you go back and you insert the decimal point in the product in your answer. So let's do some examples. Here we have two decimals that we're multiplying together. One is negative, one is positive. The signs are different, so our answer is going to be a negative. So off the bat, I'm going to write that down. And now I'm going to multiply. If I take out the decimal points, I'm going to have 23 times 45. So do the math. 45 times 23, or you could do it the other way around, it doesn't matter. 15, 1, 12 plus 1 is 13. Once I move to my tens digit, to multiply by my tens digit, I have to start my answer in the tens place. So I'm going to put a 0 as a placeholder. 2 times 5 is 10, carry the 1, 8 plus 1 is 9. Add them up, I get 5, 3, and 10. Now I go back and I figure out how many decimal places I need. I had 1 decimal place in the first factor. I had 1 decimal place in the second factor. That's a total of 2. So here's 1, here's 2, place the decimal point. Again, a negative times a positive. If you use the faces, it's a negative times a positive. Poor guy got in a fight, one eye shut closed. He is not happy. The answer is negative 10 and 35/100ths. All right, let's look at F. F is multiplying with fractions. I know some of you kind of want to just go and change these fractions to decimals, but I promise you, sometimes it's a lot easier to leave them in fraction form. So I have a negative times a negative that's going to give me a positive answer. And a positive times a negative is going to give me a negative. Okay? Or the trick here is that if there are an odd number that you're multiplying together, an odd number of negative signs, then your answer is negative. Okay, this one's super easy, guys. Fraction multiplication, you can multiply more than 2 fractions at a time. You just multiply all the numerators together. 2 times 1 is 2, times 3 is 6. Multiply all the denominators together. 3 times 2 is 6, times 5 is 30. And simplify. Divide both by 6 and we get a negative 1/5. You could have also simplified first. You could have said, okay, all these 2's, I can simplify 2 divided by 2 is 1. This 2 divided by 2 is 1. Can't do anything with the 5, but I can do the 3's over here. 3 divided by 3 is 1. 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 1 times 1 times 1 equals 1. 1 times 1 times 5 equals 5. Either way, you get the same answer, which is a negative 1/5. That was super easy, wasn't it? Okay, and finally, let's talk about dividing rational numbers. It's just the same as multiplying when it comes to the signs. If the signs are the same, if you have 2 numbers that you're multiplying together and the signs are the same, you get a positive answer. If the signs are different, then your answer is going to be negative. When it comes to dividing with fractions, the main thing to remember is LCR, leave, change, reciprocal. If you're dividing with decimals, you need to remember that you have to have a whole number divisor. We don't want that decimal in a divisor, so you have to move that decimal point and turn it into a whole number. 2 examples. First one, negative 5/8 divided by negative 6/7. First thing I'm going to talk about is the sign. A negative divided by a negative. So I'm using the faces. A negative divided by a negative. He's sleeping. He's dreaming about making an A on his test. He is happy. So my answer is going to be a positive. Dividing with fractions, LCR. Okay, so it's going to be 5/8, leave it alone, change the division to multiplication, and you're going to write the reciprocal. Just flip that fraction upside down to get the reciprocal. Now, looking at this, I can't simplify before multiply, so let's multiply. Multiply your numerators. 5 times 7 is 35. Multiply your denominators. 8 times 6 is 48. And this cannot be simplified, so your answer is a positive 35/48. I'm sorry, positive. And our last example, negative 2.8 divided by negative 4. This is the same as saying 2.8 divided by a negative 4. It's just written in fraction form. All right, we're dividing a positive and a negative. He's not happy. He got into a fight. So our answer is going to be a negative. And let's do the math. 2.8 is the dividend. It goes inside. The 4 is our divisor. It's already a whole number. Now, since it's a whole number, we're just going to bring this decimal point straight up. 4 does not go into 2, but it goes into 28 7 times. So our answer is a negative 7/10. And that's all there is to it. Nice job, Bobcats.